Hello, everybody, and welcome to the November edition of the Seekers Forum. I hope you're having a great weekend. And let's say hello to Jay Copley. How are you, Jay?
Hey, good to see you, Mark.
Great to see you, too. So this month, we're going to be looking at the absolute rightness of things as they are. Now, this is a proposition that a lot of people have trouble with, this idea that life is not a problem to be solved. It's not a broken thing that needs to be fixed. And that, in fact, there is nothing wrong in the universe. We're going to be looking at the suggestion that right and wrong are man-made concepts that have little to do with reality. And the ways in which this misunderstanding warps our mind, it wounds the heart, and it also puts us at odds with ourselves and other people. In fact, the belief that there's something wrong with the world traps us in a never-ending conflict that stops us from appreciating life's inherent balance, even with the existence of suffering and pain and injustice. This is an utter paradox, and is one that runs counter to everything that we're led to believe by an anthropocentric, mind-centered culture that puts human beings at the top of the mountain of creation above nature. According to this arrogant view, God created humankind in his image to serve as the planet's landlord, its judge and jury, like the divine's representative in the material world. This lie tells us that our job is to determine what's right and wrong, what belongs in reality and what doesn't, using our godlike powers of mind. But of course, this suggestion is absurd. When we look around, we find no proof whatsoever of such heavenly clarity in the human mind. There's no critical mass of human wisdom that would make such sovereignty possible or even desirable. In a world teeming with conflict, division, and violence, along with altruism and cooperation and care, there is no indication that this mixture of darkness and light is meant to be otherwise, or that we're the ones to divide reality in half. In the contrary, we see how important it is to do away with this fantasy and stop laboring under this misperception that peace and harmony are meant to prevail on earth. This misperception, this misunderstanding that the upheaval, uncertainty, and destruction that we see around us is anything but endemic to life on earth. In truth, there has never been a time in recorded history when bad things did not happen to good people, when neighbors weren't turned against neighbor, when there wasn't a gap between the haves and the have-nots, or when sickness, suffering, old age, and death were anything but ubiquitous to the human condition. The experience of being in a body has always come with as much sorrow as joy and as much pain as there is pleasure. This doesn't mean that we don't aspire to be happy and that we shouldn't do everything possible to help relieve suffering wherever we find it. Of course we should. But what we need to adjust is our tendency to get stuck in ideas about right and wrong, to wait for miracles and be angry and disappointed until they come to pass. It's much wiser and more constructive to focus on what is possible, to be agents of healing and love in a world that's always going to be mixed up. Just as violence and destruction are part of our human character, so is the desire to work for peace, to cultivate compassion and altruism toward other people. We have a tremendous capacity for change and improvement, and we gravitate naturally toward unity. We long for wholeness and to reclaim a sense of interconnection, to make the world a better place. These are beautiful, genuine, and necessary aspects of what it means to be an awake human being and enjoy our lives to the fullest. But there is not, however, the slightest suggestion that our best efforts are going to result in permanent change, nor that they will shift in any lasting way this cosmic cycle of birth and destruction. We find no indication that what we call wrong will ever be done away with, or that what we call right will ever prevail. So instead of harboring these idealized fantasies, we look around and see contradiction, inconsistency, and metamorphosis. We see creation and collapse. We see that every flow is followed by an ebb. and nothing but overwhelming evidence that the positive and negative together serve a sacred purpose in the scheme of existence. No matter how much we struggle, we can't escape the duality of the material world, nor can we think our way to a sanitized, pain-free dream of perfection. The question we need to ask ourselves, particularly as seekers, is how do we live with this duality, knowing that beyond the appearance of opposites, the rise and the fall of material life, there exists a metaphysical unity that is unconditional, indivisible, and way beyond our limited ideas of right and wrong. This unchanging unity is the core of our being. It's the presence we remember when the mind quiets down, which connects us to our spiritual nature and also steadies us through the ups and downs of our lives with a power far greater than we can imagine. This essence is not a product of thinking. It's not an idea. It's not a concept or a theory. It's always there when we pay attention, reminding us that how we judge the world is almost totally irrelevant. When we forget that this essence is there, which we do a lot of the time, and look outward for peace and perfection where they can't be found, we only become more frustrated and lost and put most of our energy into fixing what we think is wrong in the belief that it will put things right and make us happy. But of course, this doesn't happen. In India, they compare this misguided effort to trying to straighten out a curly dog's tail. No matter how hard you try, the tail will always bounce back to its original shape. It's not that the dog's tail is a mistake or in need of repair. It's just the way curly dog tails look. And the rest is our story about how things should be. The same principle can be applied to all of our efforts. If you're honest about your experience, you'll recognize that this is true. When you step back from your judgments about the way things ought to be, you see the futility of your efforts in stark relief. Now, this isn't an argument for passivity or for lack of effort, nor is it a recommendation to stop having opinions, which is impossible, or feeling aversion when it arises. Instead, it's a lesson about befriending disappointment, confronting life's permanent dissatisfactions, the tenuousness of life in a physical body, and looking beyond this dualistic existence to the unchanging unity underneath. It's about shifting your focus from right or wrong, good or bad, to appreciate the non-dual perfection of your essential spiritual nature. But how does this work in everyday life? That's what we want to know. Is it possible to have faith in goodness, generosity, equality, and social action while acknowledging that their opposite will always exist? That's the question. Don't human beings require ideals to bolster our inspiration? What about the arc of history bending toward justice? Isn't it necessary to believe that evil can be eradicated, that injustices can be reversed if we hope to create a better world? The uncomfortable answer is not really. Great things are achieved every day alongside the knowledge that every good deed has its shadow, that everything human comes with limits. In fact, this humility is critical if we hope to avoid utopian megalomania and the myth that anyone knows the whole truth or the right way for everybody. Just think about the great things that people do. Athletes strive for perfection knowing that it will never come. Artists work toward the ideal creation, aware that it will forever be beyond their reach. Activists throw themselves into helping with the knowledge that their job will never be done. Mother Teresa spent 50 years helping the poorest of the poor in Calcutta with no illusion that poverty would cease to exist or that suffering, such as she witnessed on a daily basis, would ever disappear completely. Instead, she was driven by love, not idealism. Her goal was compassion, not material perfection. Each of us aspires to excellence because that's how we're built. We've talked before in the Seeker's Forum about the Greek concept of arete, A-R-E-T-E, which translates roughly to excellence. The arete of a knife is to cut well. The arete of an eye is to see well. And the arete of a human being is to do the very best that we can with what we are given. Spending your life railing against right and wrong is a terrible waste of time and energy and excellence. Instead of sitting in judgment of life and punishing others and ourselves with our ideals, we can choose instead to be grounded and humble. Rather than complain that things are never good enough, we can serve the world in whatever way possible, while knowing that lasting happiness and unity are only found in the realm of the spirit. This orientation makes us grateful for what we have, and it also unhooks us from spoiledness over what we don't have. For example, I was working recently with a retired lawyer who's very unhappy. And his unhappiness stems largely from his solid opinion about what's right and what's wrong, what's meant to be and what isn't meant to be. Let's call him Jeff. Jeff suffers from a bizarre certainty that if the world just behaved as he knows it should, everyone would be better off and he'd finally be content. As someone who spent his professional life arguing cases in court, where right and wrong are highly subjective, and justice is what you say it is, Jeff is trapped inside a paradigm whose validity is nowhere to be found in the actual world. Despite his many privileges, Jeff keeps himself miserable by obsessing over what's wrong with the world, the ways that people are failing him, all the obstacles he imagines are standing between him and the life that he thinks he deserves. Even though this is a losing battle, Jeff hasn't been able to give up this litigating against reality. He was raised to argue against things as they are, gauging his success on the ability to determine outcomes. And now that Jeff is divorced and retired, he's transferred that strategy to things like romance and health, and even his approach to leisure time. When I spoke to Jeff recently, he was angry as usual that nothing was going as he'd planned. He moaned about COVID. He was meant to be traveling, not trapped in his house. He bitched about women and politics, and even the beautiful house that he's built, which he now feels is an albatross around his neck. Retirement was turning out to be as frustrating for Jeff as the legal career that he always hated. And as for relationships, women were completely unmanageable, he told me. That's the word that he used, unmanageable, including the one that he claims to be in love with. He said to me, "It's just all wrong." And that word, when he said it, just filled the space with defeat and frustration. So I asked him, how did he know that it was wrong? He just glared at me and said nothing. I went on, what if your life is exactly how it should be, including the parts that you can't stand? Jeff demanded to know if I was suggesting that he doesn't deserve to be happy. I said, of course not. That's not what I'm doing at all. I was only suggesting that maybe life was trying to teach him a different way of looking at things. Maybe if he dropped the right-wrong obsession and considered his situation without so much judgment, he might feel a little better. And when I said that, I saw that something shifted in his expression. For the first time, I saw a kind of acknowledgement flash across his face. His jaw relaxed, his eyes got a bit softer. I saw the fists on Jeff's knees begin to unclench. What if he dropped his assumptions, I asked him, lowered his expectations, and allowed himself to be surprised? Jeff said, how can I possibly do that? Well, I started by suggesting that he could start by shifting his view of life as a trial that he either won or lost, to seeing it instead as a kind of natural phenomenon, something that's always changing, something that has its own flow. Jeff said, do you mean like a river? And for one of the first times since we've been working together, he actually seemed to be listening instead of loading his mental gun with a comeback. I said, rivers have their shape. They have their rapids, their slow parts, their twists and surprises. They have dangerous parts that you can't control. And they also have beautiful parts that you weren't expecting. I asked Jeff if he would judge a river as wrong because it possessed a shape that he hadn't engineered. Well, he got the point. He got the point that there was nothing to judge. His point of view was his point of view, but that didn't make him right. And when Jeff left that day, he no longer looked angry. Instead, he seemed a little bit puzzled, kind of interested, alert, and also strangely younger. So ask yourself, how attached are you to your ideas about right and wrong, good and bad, what should be and what shouldn't be? Do you believe that you're an authority on what belongs in the world and what doesn't? Do you beat yourself up for not being perfect, as if this were possible in the material world? Have you ever considered that life is exactly how it's supposed to be? And finally, have you ever thought that there's nothing standing between you and happiness but your own opinions and expectations? As a very opinionated person, this is a question that I've asked myself for a long time. And I've learned that when I can relax my opinions, when I can relax my ideas about what should and shouldn't be, I'm able to see the rightness, the balance, the wholeness of things as they are. So, Jay, why don't you pull up the question and we'll do some writing? I'd like you now to take 15 minutes to write about whether you believe that your life today is exactly what it's meant to be down to the smallest detail. Do you believe that your life today is exactly what it's meant to be down to the smallest detail? Why or why not? Be as specific as you can be. We'll take 15 minutes to do that, please, and then we'll come back together as a group.